Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Oliver Morton. I'm a senior editor at The Economist, and I'll be chairing this roundtable. And before we go on, I think it's my job to do the bit that comes at the beginning of the television show that says, previously on. So previously on, last year, I had the great privilege of chairing a discussion here, which was basically the launch of the Global Climate Overshoot Commission. And next year, I will, I hope, share something which finds out what happened to it. This year we're here for sort of like mid-course briefing. So that I know some of you were able to come to the meeting to the panel at 1:15, for which thanks. For those of you who weren't, the very short roundup is that there is a real strong risk that one or both of the Paris targets will be overshot in the next 10 to 30 years. The Overshoot Commission has taken on the task of thinking seriously about that. Not so that other people don't have to, but in order to try and get the conversation, as Pascal said in the panel this afternoon, to get outside one particular box. No one, I think, associated with the Commission, certainly not me and the other people I know who think about this, no one is saying that any of this is an alternative to deep, fast and serious mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. But if, as we heard at the panel this morning, if you believe that there are existential threats to parts of Africa at 2 degrees Celsius, you have to also ask yourself, what else can we, should we not be doing? That, as I understand it, is the role of the Commission. Now, we have a couple of the commissioners here, and including the co-chair Pascal Lamy. And what I would like to see here, and what I'm going to try and help facilitate, is you either ask or on occasion tell them what you think they need to know or what you want to know about them, but you do it quickly, because even just the people around the table could fill us up for well over 45 minutes if everyone needs to prolong their moment of inquiry. So quickness is very much, and I will try to be quite strict about that, is very much of the order here. And with that said, I'm going to ask Pascal to fill you in a little bit on where the Commission is and what he would like to be asked about or informed about over the now 40 minutes that we have together. Pascal.
Thank you very much, Oliver, and thanks for so nicely describing the Paris Peace Forum usual three-step dance, float, shape and impact. And we are, you mentioned last year's was the float step. This time is the shape step. This commission has taken shape, and I'll tell you briefly where we are. And hopefully next year will be what we are looking for, which is a serious public informed debate about what should we do if and when we overshoot 1.5 degrees, which we believe we will, unfortunately. So the Commission started working after the Paris Peace Forum last year, sort of end of spring last year. We composed the Commission. We started looking together with Adrien Advocacy and J.C. Reynolds, the existing science, the existing work on either adaptation or carbon removal or geoengineering / SRM, solar radiation modification. Thanks for Oliver for recalling that we all start from a base, which is our common, totally agreed base, which is that plan A is to limit emissions. And that's a given, that's something we will repeat when we issue our recommendations, but we know that the way we do it, the rhythm we do it, what models show, is that this, unfortunately, will not be enough. We've been looking during the previous meetings at a variety of issues, which we will restitute in the final report. Why are we where we are? Because I think before moving to solutions, we need to understand why we will overshoot the 1.5. We need to have as much as possible a clear and consensual diagnosis about this. We will, of course, look at what are the consequences of this overshoot, and they are, as can be expected, rather dramatic. And then we will reopen, which we have started doing, adaptation, whether north-south, east-west, country per country, and we know that there is a big north-south dimension because of too limited resources on adaptation. And the first discussions of the Commission 6 months ago on this were sort of a preface of what we've been hearing at COP27 in Sharm this week, and probably even more next week. Then reopening the box of carbon removal. And we know we have a series of technical tech issues. We also have a problem of economic model of carbon removal, as long as we don't pay for the carbon you remove. We now have reached a stage where for some parts of this planet, you pay for the carbon you emit, and that's, in my view, a big step. And there is an economic model, which we know how it works, depending on where the price is. We know that the price is not where it should be if we listen to science, whether climate or economic science, but we have a model. In the case of carbon removal, we don't yet have an economic model of how it works, whether it is for natural solutions or whether it is for more industrial and tech-based solutions. So we are investigating all these aspects, the tech one, the economic one. And on SRM, problem is not an economic one. SRM is cheap, relatively. There is a tech issue, and there are various options, and the science is still in the making on this. And by the way, we know that we have a third of science which is enthusiastic about SRM, a third of science which hates SRM, and 1/3 of science who's looking at this scientifically and which hasn't concluded its mind. And then on this one, we know that we have a mega governance problem, because whatever view you have on whether or not we should recourse to SRM and in which quantities and which technology, we know that there is a risk of unintended consequences, of unpredictable distribution of gains or losses, and this necessitates a full-fledged institutional user's notice, a framework of governance of SRM in case one country, for whatever reason, would decide to step into this one of the three boxes. So for the moment, and that's the end of my answer to your question, we are opening all these boxes. We got a sense of where we come from. We are opening all these boxes, and we probably will make recommendations on tech, economy, and governance in different proportions in these three different boxes. We are listening to a lot of people, science, NGOs, civil society, We have a youth forum in the making in order to make sure that we don't just discuss between old silverbacks, which may have experience and wisdom, but maybe not necessarily imagination. So we are in this process. Time-wise, my intention is to issue a set of recommendations by, let's say, summer 2023, so that we can preface the new season with UNGA, Paris Peace Forum, and so on. The target, the result we have in mind as a result of this commission would be to launch, again, a public, well-informed debate that, if and when it lands, and I don't know whether it will, and it might depend on the quality and the innovativeness of our recommendations, will contribute, and that's back to the Paris Peace Forum spirit, will contribute to moving our planet nearer to where it should be on its trajectory of decarbonation. That's where we are. That's the way we are proceeding. Of course, I'm ready to answer any other questions, but I'm also ready to use this roundtable to listen to those of you who are not part of the Commission, and there are some who are part of the Commission around this table and some who are not, in order to help us making from this bit of an afternoon together an occasion for us to learn and bring new material on the basket of the Commission. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pascal. Arantxa, would you like to say anything at this point, or just no? Okay. So if people who want to make a point could do the traditional thing and turn their nameplates up, that would be really helpful. But while you're all thinking about that, I was going to ask Janos something, and which was specifically, you've been looking at the sort of like almost the meta-politics of this issue for the last 6 years, of how this happens before it gets political, about how you even start having discussions about both carbon dioxide removal and also about solar geoengineering. What do you think the biggest danger for the Commission is over the next year?
Difficult question. I think I would say there are two big issues. One, I think, Pascal, you alluded to it, the report has to be good. It has to be good quality, it has to have good science behind it, it has good socio-political analysis and all of that. And that's one. But the other one, which is equally, if not more important, it has to be embedded in the real politic of the world. And we know this is a very challenging, controversial issue. We know that the world is very much divided on this issue. You are either pro or anti-SRM, and you know, all these different issues. And so I think it will be hugely important for the Commission to reflect on and then find ways to not just write a report, but find ways to communicate with different elements of the political process to then be able to ensure that the good report, the good quality report, actually finds way to the people who matter.
If I may add just one word on this, the third obstacle, which is, and we've had to cope with that, and we will have to keep coping with that, which is the sort of, who are these guys who tell us what to do? Where do they come from? I mean, who gave them a mandate? Why them? I mean, what's the legitimacy of what they propose? And it's an excellent question. The normal answer is, well, you know, I've collected a bunch of people who seem to be rather well respected, who are wise, experienced. None of them is totally crazy, at least in public. I mean, these are respectable people. I've chosen them with diverse experience. There's a good gender balance. There's a good north-south balance. So is that enough to answer your question? And in some cases, one people say, okay, okay. And others look at me and say, okay, well, I'm not going to bother you more, but I'm not convinced. And that's back to the point you made. This question should disappear if we produce something which is good, solid, and which triggers public conversation and debate. And that's my target, but I'm not sure we are getting there yet.
I'm just going to actually push back very slightly on what you said, Janos, because I think it might be easier if there were people who were very pro and very anti, because you'd have a fairly classic debate. My feeling is that the lack of there isn't really a pro side. There may be a pro feeling around some people on solar geoengineering, but there's really not a force out there saying, yeah, let's do it. And so that's, to some extent, introducing it without feeling like you're introducing it in the context of something that might be seen as a solution is, one of the hard jobs.
Just very quickly, I agree with you. I didn't say that. I think what's important is that we recognize that the world is divided on these issues and therefore prepare the debate accordingly. But yes, absolutely, we need the different views, the different perspectives, which are not always clearly in a yes or no. There's a lot of continuity in between.
If I may, I'm a newcomer to the Commission, so you'll bear with me if what I say has already been dealt with. But I think the big danger of this Commission is giving the impression that there is an escape clause to reducing emissions and changing the way our economy and our finance works. So this Commission is not about item one, it's about what happens when item one is not moving at the speed or to the extent that is going to allow us to remain within the boundaries we decided to have. And in a certain way, it's like, do we have another planet where we could go? It's like the question we sometimes, do we have another planet we could go to? And like this, we don't have to deal with the difficulties and the limits and the constraints in this planet. So the Promethean part that we were just talking, Oliver, of this is, in my view, what we have to be very clear about. This is not a replacement to the mitigation efforts that need to be undertaken.
Thanks very much. Okay, I'm going to go to Stuart now.
Thank you very much. A really interesting discussion. I guess a couple of questions.
Could you just outline who you are?
Yeah, sorry. I'm Stuart Patrick. I'm a senior fellow now at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, but in the past year I wrote a report, and a couple of people were on the advisory committee here for the Council on Foreign Relations on reflecting sunlight to reduce climate risk, priorities for research and international governance. And in this regard, I'm really interested in a couple of things that I hope the Commission will deal with. One of them is how do you actually discuss and define risks, and then how do the 4 strategies for managing climate risk actually work together, to pick up on what Arantxa just said? Because it seems to me that the argument for even considering SRM is that it's a potentially low cost, at least in financial terms, but relatively high leverage way to shave the peak of warming while we make progress on the other things. But the key is, of course, that's a big caveat, are we going to make progress on those other things? So when you think about emissions reduction, CDR, adaptation, and SRM as the 4 strategies, the first 2 that are long-term, emissions reduction and CDR, because it's going to take a while, and the others sort of are ways to survive the transition while the temperatures are so high. I think it's really important to, when you're discussing risk, to have it in the framework of risk. The risks of SRM, the risks of CDR cannot be weighed in isolation. They have to be weighed against the risks of this experiment that we are currently conducting on this planet. And so we need to think about it in that regard, because particularly as we exceed 1.5 and look like we're going to exceed 2.0, certain risk calculations may come to the fore. But I think, to pick up on what Arantxa was suggesting, is that, to deal with the issue of moral hazard, there has to be some sort of mechanism, even if we're going to go down this route, to basically say, look, there's a structure here that virtually guaranteeing it's not a get out of jail free card, that other things will continue to happen, whether it's by making making a mandatory that if you're going to be on the governing body for any of these sorts of things, you would have to continue doing that. But I'll just finish by saying this, that my report did not advocate solar geoengineering, but it did suggest that there may come a point which we do not want to be in, where if we have not figured out whether this thing can work, and we have not laid anticipatory rules of governance, we're going to be in a world of hurt when some country starts doing it by themselves or without knowing if it's going to work. We feel desperate enough to do it. So anyway, that's my thought.
Would it be right to suspect that from your question, you feel that the way of approaching risk in discussions like this has previously not always been helpful?
Yeah, I guess I would say that. I mean, I think that, there are so many unknowns about this potential enterprise, and I'm talking about SRM here, but CDR has some of those too as well. But I think that, we're staring in the face of just awful outcomes right now, and outcomes that this whole idea is not necessarily one that is going to be imposed upon developing countries. Some of the loudest voices, and Andy can speak to this, or some of the most sort of poignant voices of folks who think that we are in a really, really bad trajectory are those from the developing world. And to the degree that those voices, and that's one of the reasons for this, to at least consider it. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks very much. I'm going to wait on getting a response from that and go to Angela.
Thank you. I think it was last week that the UN came out with 2.6 as long as everybody delivers on their NDCs, because otherwise we would go to closer to 3 degrees or maybe higher. So this is following up on Arantxa's point. If you know that point number 1 is that the question of overshoot is no longer, according to the latest information by the biggest authority on the subject, is no longer a question, but then the focus would have to be on, you focus on how to adapt and what, number 2, number 3, whatever. Or are we going to present our own or spend some time or some firepower on some of the science itself in order to go to maybe 2.4 or maybe 2.7 or maybe 2.8, or are we going to go into the science itself with our, let's say, more limited resources, rather than focus on the problem itself, which is something that everybody's telling us now, that we are going to overshoot. So this is the point.
I'm going to take a question from Jackson as well.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to contribute in terms of, let me introduce myself quickly. So Jack Kimani with the Climate Action Platform for Africa. I lead the organization, as the name implies, focused on the continent of Africa. And that's what I wanted to speak about, because I feel there's quite a unique role that the continent can play towards this. You're talking of a continent that doesn't have an old economy that you need to decarbonize. So it presents essentially a low-hanging fruit. And then you look at if African countries were to develop with the same per capita emissions as the current middle-income countries, I think the numbers are about 12 gigatons by the year 2050. So there is an opportunity to avoid a scenario that portends right now if we do the right thing. And because we do not have legacy infrastructure, energy, agriculture infrastructure, we can jump right into the green economy of the future, and perhaps become the green manufacturing hub for the world, and allow that the green transition we've been talking about Africa can play a leading role in that. So just wanted to emphasize that as one of the considerations that the Commission, as they're considering options, there is an opportunity that a continent that currently, because of its lagging behind in development, actually turns out to be an asset.
Thanks very much indeed. I'm going to go to Andrew next because he's got his point up, but also because Stuart kind of threw the ball to him earlier.
Yeah, Stuart did, and then Jackson.
And in a way, Jackson has as well, yeah.
Sped it along, so thank you both for that. So I wanted to support everything that Jack just said about not looking at the global south as a passive recipient of decisions about things like SRM, the topic I work on, that are made in the global north. I run an NGO called the Degrees Initiative. It's our mission to build the capacity of developing countries to do their own research, to make their own minds up about whether SRM is something that's in their country or their region's interest, or the opposite, something that they want to go out there and oppose. And to date, in Africa so far, we've funded projects in Cote d'Ivoire, in Benin, in Kenya, in South Africa. They're doing some leading science on what SRM might mean for day zero droughts in Cape Town, for the West African monsoon. And they're really demonstrating that this isn't going to be a south-north topic. It's south-south and it's north-north. There are going to be divergent interests and divergent points of view. All the better, therefore, for some sort of a global commission to really start catalyzing this process, to put a roadmap together whereby we can, in the next 5 to 10 years, have a properly global evaluation process. I've worked on SRM for 14 years, largely by mistake. And one of the greatest concerns I've had for this time is that while we do our research carefully and we consider things in our commissions and our panels, desperate people can do desperate things. And so I don't find it beyond the realms of possibility that within 5, 10 years, desperate countries might just say, well, we've got to go out and do this. So I would like to see from the Commission a plan of action for how we're going to be able to evaluate SRM, such that when someone says, look, we're going to do this, we have the evidence and we can respond to them, and we being the global community, not just the global north.
Thanks very much indeed. Gabriella.
Thank you so much, and I feel that Andy's point really matches what I was going to say, because I want to make a contribution of what we are doing at UNESCO in terms of reflecting what does it mean to rely on climate geoengineering beyond the question of the technological issues, beyond the question of the technological optimism, because we always have those optimists that says, don't worry, technology will save us all. I feel that we need to have this global debate. And this is what we're doing at UNESCO, and I'm happy that Ines is here because she's writing a report that I hope will contribute to this debate, because it's the ethical reflection on how do we apply these technologies, who does the research, who takes the decision on how to do it, how do we ensure that the Global South and the thinking and the research that the Global South is putting at the table will bring it over, who takes the precautionary principle, who considers solidarity issues, who considers sustainability issues. I mean, this is beyond the technology. It's how do we frame the technology in a sense that is really taking into consideration very different viewpoints and not driven only by those who knows how to do it. And therefore, we will be having this conversation next week in Sharm el-Sheikh about the ethics of geoengineering and the ethics of climate change. This is the work that we do at UNESCO, and we look forward to delivering some of the responses of how we feel that this needs to be governed, if ever we agree that it needs to be deployed. Because the other part, and I might finish with this, is that it might also distract the efforts that Angel and Arantxa were saying. Let's not just, I mean, it's fine to consider these things, but don't forget that we have the commitments and we need to move forward into delivering those.
So do those conditions, or those concerns of precaution, solidarity, and ethics, do those get framed within the context that Stuart was talking about comparing comparing them to the issues of precaution, solidarity, and ethics that apply to the otherwise, to the non-geoengineered but anthropogenic world. Because there is always a temptation to think that the opposite is, as it were, the status quo. But the whole point of the Overshoot Commission, as I understand it, is that the status quo is no longer an option at all. But on that point, I'm actually going to turn back to Pascal. I thought there were some fascinating things there. I was very interested in the risk point. Also, the degree to which the Commission might be laying out, as Andy asked for, a very definite plan about, not just about how to think about this, but how to respond to it actually as a real possibility.
Well, I mean, that's a central preoccupation, which is that what we recommend should provide a informed judgment on the risks, on the feasibility, on the priorities of adaptation, removal, and SRM. And we will have to exercise judgment. I mean, the risk weighting exercise, which Stuart Patrick mentioned, is part of what we will have to do at the end of the day. And this is a matter of judgment. And I will have to try and cook a judgment soup with all the individual positions around the table. And normally, if this sort of group dynamic works well, we add our judgment capacities together. We don't diminish the capacity of judgment of your neighbor, provided there is enough agreement. And if there's disagreement, I mean, there will have to be disagreement. So this is, of course, fundamental. There is an element of evaluation, and all this does not lie in numbers or what science expert A, B, or C tells you. We have to make an evaluation of the quantum of adaptation, which we need. We have to make an evaluation of whether removal can be scaled up, and there are questions about this. And we have to make an evaluation of the risks of SRM, while, and this is why we've already gone through this stage, while also painting a proper picture of what happens the moment you start overshooting 1.5, which creates a situation which is not the one we have had in mind since 2015, when at the sort of last minute, NGOs and Kiribati and a few others made sure that the 2 degrees would be dragged down into 1.5 to make sure that, and that's what happened at the time.
I think they would have said ambition was dragged up.
But the temperature was dragged down. Now, which takes me, by the way, to the observation that the interval has shrunk in recent time. I mean, the bottom part has gone up, but the top part has gone down. So this is not all bad news. The problem being that the bad news starts when the bottom when the bottom part of the interval goes up. On Africa, absolutely agree. Africa can be an asset, notably with nature-based solutions. And as you've noticed, there is a reasonably strong presence of African members in the Commission. This is no coincidence. Same for the observations on North-South, who talks to whom. Is it once more the North telling the South what it should do? No. I mean, if you look at the composition of the Commission, it is North-South balanced. I'm not sure where I will put our Chinese member, whether he is to be put on the north or on the south part of the balance, and if nowhere, it doesn't change the balance. But it is a conversation when so far I haven't seen within this diverse group a North camp and a South camp. In none of our discussions so far, and we are only roughly halfway, if I count the one we will have next week in Egypt. So that's my answer to your questions at this stage. And by the way, Gabriela, if there is a discussion on ethics of that next week in Sharm, I will be there on 17th and 18th. Huh? Oh, she's left. Okay, so please tell her that I'll be happy to jump in if necessary.
Did you want to make another point? Your card was up and then it went down again. No? Okay.
I moved it so that we could.
Right, so we're all growing together as a community,
We're kind of.
seat by seat, yes. Alexis, was there anything you wanted to bring in?
Yeah, good question. Like the focus was of the discussion was also on like adaptation. I think Pascal, you mentioned it. I'm Alexis Lafitan from the United Nations Development Program, and so I was wondering, is as part of the work of the Commission, also like I was reading like the press release, like greatly expanded measures on adaptation. So will the Commission also discuss, the global financial architecture to, meet these greatly expanded adaptation measures?
Answer, yes. The question is whether we will say we are obviously not at scale, or whether we will say we are not at scale in a proportion of 1 to 100 or 1 to 50. But the answer is definitely yes. I can tell you already that I know a number of members of the Commission who will insist that this box is open to the right scale. And again, what we've heard, and we will keep hearing on COP27, anyhow, would have made it unavoidable if we had somebody around the table of the Commission would have thought at some stage we could have avoided the topic. No way.
Janos, you've got your
Just
metaphorical hand raised.
3 super short reflections based on the discussion that I heard. The first is we talk a lot about the level of the overshoot. We don't know how far it's going to go. But we actually know that we're at 1.2 right now, and it's already catastrophic. Let's just go to Pakistan and nowhere else. So at 1.5 is not good. We're committing lots of disasters, lots of people dying, countries disappearing. So just put this in perspective that, whatever the level is, this Commission has a lot to do. Whether we overshoot the 1.5 or the 2.5 or the 1.2, there is a lot to do. One. Second point, and this is starting with what Arantxa said at the beginning, the priority must be emission reductions. There's no question about that. Doesn't matter what we do, but we have to recognize that emission reductions alone is not going to stop us from overshooting. It's too late for that. So, but then it's very important not to look at this as we have plan A and plan B and plan C. We have plan A, and we have to revise plan A, to use UN language, plan A Rev 1, which includes maybe some additional things that we have to do. But that's so important that it comes together as a package. The third point, we mentioned moral hazard, super important, we have to deal with it. And the governance mechanisms that have to be developed have to deal with it. But we haven't talked about moral imperative. If the situation is as bad as it looks, as bad as this table here is talking about it, there is a moral imperative to study, to understand better these issues so that we can make evidence-based decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Arantxa, did you want to come back on that?
No, I wanted to reinforce the point of Pascal on the financing, and I think it has to be a bit more than just, or at least I will be pushing for a little bit more than defining what's the gap. Because what we see is, and this is where, in my view, the report has to combine intelligently what needs doing, but also how we do it. And in the how, we have to be very assertive, in my view, in terms of possible solutions. Because if not, we are basically spinning the wheels. We've been spinning the wheels for a while, but what I see now is spinning the wheels in a big way, which is getting a lot of frustration on one side and no action on the other side.
I'm in the middle. Pascal.
I agree, although I think, given the expertise and the time we have and the way we have divided the work, I think we will have to give an order of magnitude of what is necessary. But I don't think we are in the position to enter into details. And we know that given a solid order of magnitude, it's something that should inform a conversation on how to do that. And then you get to loss and damage and the reform of the sort of Mia Mottley's Bridgetown agenda and the reform of IFIs and so on. There's one point on which I want to insist, which is that so far there's been a lot of attention, and I already mentioned this a moment ago, there's been a lot of attention on pricing carbon in order to penalize emission at the right sort of externality price. I haven't seen anything at scale serious about a positive incentive to carbon removal. And I'm personally convinced that if there is not a positive incentive to carbon removal, a lot of what we say on the potential of nature-based solutions for removing carbon will not appear. We may believe it would be good if they appear, but if a farmer doesn't get an incentive to clean and re-carbonize the soil, it won't happen. As, by the way, it would not have happened if we hadn't imposed, at least in some places in Europe, on steel, aluminium, or paper, with sometimes a bit too generous allocation free allocation systems. So the economics of that, in my view, needs to be relooked at in a way that structures an agenda on this issue, which I haven't seen. I've seen economists discussing this, but I've never seen the connection between a proper scientific, technical reasoning and a proper economic reasoning, and we will have to spend time on this, which, by the way, is not an issue for SRM, because SRM, and that's one of the criticisms to SRM, it doesn't change emissions. So it's not a problem for SRM, but it is a problem for adaptation and for carbon removal, in my view.
But it's interesting, though, that I think at the earlier session, you were talking about the fact that you thought carbon dioxide removal posed less of a governance issue, and I can see that in one level. But the actual surveillance issue for pricing removals must be absolutely huge, yes? To actually know that the carbon has gone away, because I think it's fairly clear that if there's a system like that, a lot of people will try and game it.
Yes, as a lot of people try and sometimes succeeded in gaming carbon pricing when it started. And we Europeans know that, of course. But you know, there's a learning curve. Now, it wasn't a very easy thing to determine how much carbon a steel mill emits. I know it's more complex to measure the quality, the sink capacity of a soil. I know that, but it will have to be done. I mean, we'll go back to all things. Huh? You don't manage things which you don't measure. Huh? And then there's a big debate about the measure and whether it's right, but we will have to go to that. And by the way, including the consequences of this in terms of competitiveness, because if you start remunerating in a way or another the capacity to increase the sink capacity of a soil, then what you do with imported products, I mean, the whole chain of issues comes in, and we have to look at that, in my view.
Okay, thank you very much. And that actually brings us almost exactly to a close on time. I'll just say a couple of last things in closing. One is that if you've been here and found this interesting, please talk about these issues, the whole package of overshoot issues, not just the solar geoengineering stuff. Please talk to that, talk to other people about that. Please keep these ideas in your mind when you think about climate change. Please, when someone says something about a temperature, say, are you just talking about emissions reduction? Are you talking about other things? What are you actually talking about when you talk about climate change? Because it is, the adaptation agenda has spent forever fighting its way up and is still not, I think, fully taken on board. These other more speculative things are still way behind the curve. And it's not to endorse them to think that they need to be talked about. And I think that came out very clearly from all the contributions here. The other thing was just sort of like 4 concepts that came across from various different people's contributions, and they don't necessarily sit easily together, but we have to try and open our minds far enough that we can fit them all in. Learning curve, there's a steep, difficult learning curve. There's a moral imperative. There are, as we heard from Gabriella, grave concerns, and there is a shortening time frame. If you have all 4 of those in your mind at once, then you'll have some sense of quite how difficult the work that Pascal and his colleagues will be doing over the next year is going to actually be. So on that note, I'll say thank you to the audience, thank you to the Commission members, both for being here and for being on the Commission, and we'll see you next year.